You know what's crazy? I used to laugh at stories about kids seeing heaven. As a medical reporter for 15 years, I'd heard it all. Bright lights, tunnels, angels. I'd write them off as dreams, medication side effects, or parents pushing their beliefs onto their children. But then I heard about Colton. This 4-year-old kid's story hit different. It wasn't just another tale of floating above hospital beds or seeing bright lights. What this little boy described during his emergency surgery shook me to my core. It challenged everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what happens in between. I first learned about his case from Dr. Sarah Martinez, head of pediatric surgery at Lincoln General. She called me late one night, her voice shaking. "You need to hear this," she said. "I've been practicing medicine for 20 years, and I can't explain what happened here. See, I'm not someone who jumps at shadows. I've built my career on facts, evidence, medical records. I've exposed fake miracle cures and debunked supernatural claims. My editor even nicknamed me the Mythbuster. But Colton's story had something different. Medical documentation, reliable witnesses, and details that a 4-year-old couldn't possibly know. Let me paint you a picture. A normal Saturday morning turns into every parent's nightmare. A little boy's stomachache becomes a race against time. His appendix bursts. Doctors scramble. His heart stops on the operating table. Not for a few seconds, but for minutes. And what happened during those minutes? That's where this story turns from a medical emergency into something that would make even the biggest skeptic question everything they believe. What Colton described wasn't some vague light at the end of the tunnel. He gave specific details about people he'd never met, conversations he couldn't have heard, and events he couldn't have seen, all while he was unconscious in the operating room. The thing that got me? The medical staff's reactions. These weren't wide-eyed believers ready to accept any supernatural explanation. These were hard-nosed professionals who'd seen countless surgeries. But something about this case left them questioning their understanding of life and death. I've spent 3 months digging into this story. I've interviewed the medical team, the family, and experts in child psychology. I've gone through every medical record, every witness statement, every piece of evidence I could find. I started out looking for holes in the story. Instead, I found something that would change how I see the world. What I'm about to share with you isn't just another near-death story. It's a case that's backed by medical evidence, witnessed by professionals, and filled with details that, trust me, will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about what happens when we die. But I need to warn you, once you hear this story, you can't unhear it. It might change the way you think about life, death, and everything in between, just like it changed me. So let's get into what exactly happened that Saturday morning. The day started like any other for Colton's family. His dad was fixing a garage door, his mom was planning a trip, and Colton was playing with his sister. Then came the vomiting, the fever, the screams of stomach pain. At first, his parents thought it was just a bad case of the flu. Kids get sick all the time, right? But by that afternoon, Colton's stomach had swollen up and his screams got worse. When he turned pale white, they rushed him to the emergency room. Something wasn't right, his mom told me, gripping her coffee cup as she recalled that day. I've seen my kids sick before, but this was different. The way he looked at me, it was like he knew something bad was coming. The ER doctor took one look at Colton and called for emergency surgery. His appendix hadn't just burst. It had been leaking poison into his body for days. His organs were shutting down. His blood pressure was crashing. Dr. Martinez showed me the surgical notes. His situation was critical, she said, pointing to his vitals. We were losing him even before we got him on the table. That's when things got weird. As they put Colton under anesthesia, he looked at the anesthesiologist and said something that gave everyone in the room chills. "Tell my dad I'll see Jesus' sister." The medical team brushed it off as anesthesia confusion. They had bigger problems. Colton's heart was failing. What happened next is documented in detail. At 3:02 p.m., his heart stopped. Flatline. The surgical team worked frantically to bring him back. 1 minute passed, then 2, 3 minutes without a heartbeat. After 2 minutes of cardiac arrest, brain damage becomes likely, Dr. Martinez explained. After 3 minutes, well, if they come back, they're usually not the same. But here's where the case file gets interesting. The nurse's notes show something odd. While they were trying to restart Colton's heart, the temperature in the operating room dropped so fast that their breath turned to vapor. In New Mexico, in July, 3 nurses documented this independently. The equipment started malfunctioning. Static filled the monitors, and right before Colton's heart started beating again, every single person in that operating room swears they heard music. Not hospital sounds, not machine beeps, music. I'm not talking about someone's phone going off. The scrub nurse told me this was like nothing I've ever heard before. Like 100 voices singing, but there were no words. When Colton's heart started beating again, everything went back to normal. The temperature rose, the equipment stabilized, the music stopped. The surgery team wrote it off as stress, exhaustion, mass hysteria, whatever made sense. But then Colton woke up. And what he said next would turn this from a strange medical case into something that even I, with all my years of debunking supernatural stories, couldn't explain away. Here's the first twist section, 4 to 1,500 words. The first person to notice something different about Colton was Jenny, his night shift nurse. She was doing her regular checks when Colton opened his eyes and said, "The angels who sang to me said you lost a baby." Jenny dropped her clipboard. She'd never told anyone at the hospital about her miscarriage 3 months earlier. When I interviewed Jenny, she still got goosebumps talking about it. "He didn't stop there," she said. "He told me my baby was a girl and that she was okay now, that she was waiting for me." But that was just the start. The next morning, when his parents came to visit, Colton said something that made his dad sit down hard in the hospital chair. "Dad, I saw Pop while I was with Jesus." Pop, Colton's great-grandfather, had died 30 years before Colton was born. No big deal, right? Kids hear family stories all the time, except Colton then described exactly how Pop looked in his early 20s, down to a scar on his chin from a farming accident. The family had never owned a picture of Pop from that age. "I saw the scar right here." Colton pointed to his own chin. Pop said he got it from a plow before he married great-grandma. His dad, trying to test him, showed Colton a picture of Pop as an old man. Colton shook his head. "No, Daddy, he's young in heaven. Nobody's old there." I fact-checked this detail. Found Pop's medical records from 1943. They mentioned treating a chin laceration from farm equipment. No one had told Colton this story. Over the next few days, more strange things came out. During a checkup, Colton pointed to Dr. Martinez and said, "You were praying in the corner while they fixed my heart. You were asking God not to let another child die." Dr. Martinez went white. She later confirmed to me that she had indeed prayed during Colton's surgery after losing a young patient the week before. She had prayed alone in the corner of the operating room while the rest of the team was working on Colton. But here's what really got to me. One afternoon, Colton was coloring in his hospital bed when he casually mentioned meeting his other sister in heaven. His mom corrected him. Colton only had one sister, Cassie. "No, Mommy," he insisted. "My other sister, the one that died in your tummy." His parents froze. 2 years before Colton was born, his mom had a miscarriage. They'd never told their kids. They hadn't even known the gender of the baby. "She looks like Cassie, but her hair is darker," Colton said, still coloring. "She told me she can't wait to meet everyone, but she's happy waiting for now." I interviewed child psychologists about this. They all said the same thing. 4-year-olds don't typically make up such specific details, and they definitely don't maintain consistent stories about made-up events. Dr. Rachel Klein, a specialist in child development, reviewed the case for me. "What stands out here," she said, "is the consistency and specificity of details that Colton couldn't have known through normal means. 4-year-olds often have active imaginations, but they typically can't maintain complex, fictional narratives without contradicting themselves. And Colton's story never changed. Not in the hospital. Not during my interviews with him months later. Not ever. The medical staff started keeping a record of everything he said. Standard procedure for unusual cases. Reading through those notes, a pattern emerged. Every verifiable detail Colton mentioned checked out. The prayers no one could have heard. The family history he couldn't have known. The personal secrets of hospital staff that came out in casual conversation. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. What Colton revealed next would shake the foundations of not just his family's beliefs, but would challenge our very understanding of what happens when we die. As I dug deeper into Colton's story, I started noticing patterns. The details he shared weren't random. They connected in ways that a 4-year-old brain couldn't plan. Let me take you through what I found. First, there were the medical details. Colton described watching his own surgery from above. Nothing new there. Lots of near-death experiences include out-of-body stuff. But Colton described specific medical tools the surgeons used, even naming their colors correctly. He pointed out which doctor held what, where each person stood. I checked the surgery records. Every detail matched. He even knew about the extra clamp I asked for, Dr. Martinez told me, shaking her head. "We didn't have it in the room at first. Had to send a nurse to get it." He described the whole thing, even though he was completely under anesthesia. Then there were the personal details about people he met up there. Not just vague descriptions, but specific conversations. He told his mom about meeting her grandfather, not Pop, but her other grandfather who died when she was 8. "He told me Grandpa Jack still does his funny laugh," his mom said, wiping tears. "That specific laugh, it was this weird snort-giggle thing. Nobody's mentioned that laugh in decades." I tracked down old home movies, found footage from 1975. Sure enough, there was that distinct laugh Colton had described. But here's what really caught my attention: the consistency in how Colton described the place place itself. Over multiple interviews spread across months, his description never wavered. The colors he saw, he said there were colors that don't exist here. The music he heard, like a million songs all at once, but they fit together. Dr. Klein, the child psychologist, pointed out something interesting. When children make up stories, they tend to add new details over time, changing things to make the story more exciting. Colton's account stayed remarkably consistent. He'd even stop people if they got details wrong when repeating his story. I started comparing Colton's description with other documented near-death experiences, found some interesting overlaps and some major differences. Like most NDEs, he described feeling peaceful, but unlike most cases, he remembered specific conversations, complete interactions, names, faces, details that could be verified. I interviewed 20 other people who'd had near-death experiences. None of them had the level of detail Colton provided. Most remembered feelings, sensations, maybe a few snippets of sight or sound. Colton remembered everything. 3 months after his surgery, Colton met his dad's friend Miguel. Right away, Colton asked, "Did your dad die in a car crash?" Miguel was stunned. His father had died in a car accident in Mexico 30 years ago. Nobody had ever mentioned this to Colton. "Your dad says he's sorry he never taught you to fish," Colton added. "He was going to take you fishing the weekend after the crash." Miguel broke down crying. He later showed me an old letter from his mom, written right after the accident. In it, she mentioned how his dad had bought fishing gear for that upcoming weekend. These specific, verifiable details kept piling up. Each one I could check out matched perfectly. The ones I couldn't verify still fit the pattern, specific, detailed, and consistent over time. Then Colton said something that changed the whole direction of my investigation. During one of our talks, he mentioned meeting the other kids. "What other kids?" I asked. "The ones who got sick but didn't come back," he said, as casual as if he were talking about playground friends. "They said they've been trying to talk to the doctors." He went on to describe 5 specific children, their names, how they died, messages they wanted to pass on. After weeks of research, I confirmed 3 of these cases, children who died in that same hospital. Their details matched Colton's descriptions exactly. The other 2 cases? Still searching for those records. Remember those 2 cases I couldn't find? 3 days after my interview with Colton, I got a call from the hospital's records department. They'd found something in their old archives. Paper records from before they went digital. 2 more children. Both matched Colton's descriptions. Both had died in surgeries over 20 years ago. But that's not what made my hands shake as I read those files. One of the children, a girl named Sarah, had left a drawing with her nurse the night before her surgery. The nurse had kept it all these years, tucked in the file. It showed exactly what Colton had been describing about the place he called heaven, right down to the colors that don't exist here. I sat in my car for an hour staring at that drawing. Then I did something I'd never done in 15 years of medical reporting. I called every parent of every child Colton had mentioned. I had to know if his messages meant anything to them. The first mom, Janet, answered on the second ring. When I told her what Colton had said about her son Tommy, that he wanted her to know he still had his blue car with him, she started crying. "We buried him with his favorite toy car," she said. "It was blue. Nobody knew about that except me and my husband. We never told anyone. It was our private thing." The second family had moved to Oregon. Their daughter Alice, according to Colton, said she was sorry she didn't say goodbye to her little brother, that she watches him play baseball. Her brother, now in high school, plays baseball. Started the year after she died. One by one, every single message checked out. Private details, personal moments, things no one could have known. But the biggest revelation came during my last interview with Colton. I'd asked him to draw what he saw during his time away. As he drew, he kept talking. "The funny thing is," he said, concentrating on his crayon drawing, "everybody can see what's happening down here. All the time. Like watching TV, but you can see everything at once." He looked up at me. "They see when people are sad about them. They can't talk to us, but they try. They send signs." "What kind of signs?" I asked. He shrugged. "Different for different people. But they say most people don't notice them. They're too busy being sad." Then he said something that stopped me cold. "Like the penny you keep finding in your car." I'd never told anyone about that. Since my brother died 3 years ago, I kept finding pennies in my car. Always in the same spot. Always heads up. Always dated 1986, the year he died. I'd cleaned out that car 100 times. Vacuumed every inch. The pennies kept showing up. "Mark says to stop throwing them away," Colton said, still drawing. "He's trying to tell you he's okay." Mark. My brother's name. I'd never mentioned him to Colton or his family. The crayon drawing Colton finished that day now hangs in my office. It shows something that looks like a city, but not quite. Colors that shouldn't work together, but do. And people. Lots of people. All young, all healthy, all connected by what look like threads of light. In the corner, he drew a small figure holding what looks like a penny. Dr. Martinez later showed me something else. Brain scans from during Colton's surgery. During those 3 minutes when his heart stopped, his brain activity should have been minimal. Instead, the scans show intense activity, more than normal, like his brain wasn't shutting down, but opening up. We can't explain it medically, she said. By all accounts, with that level of trauma and oxygen deprivation, there shouldn't have been any activity at all. Looking back now, I realize I was fighting the truth for a long time. My brain kept trying to find other explanations. Maybe Colton had heard these stories somewhere. Maybe he was picking up on subtle clues. Maybe. But sitting in my car that night, after the penny conversation, something broke inside me. Or maybe something fixed itself. I pulled out my phone and called my mom. We hadn't really talked since Mark's funeral. The pain was too much. Mom, I said, do you remember Mark's penny collection? Silence on the other end. Then a shaky breath. He started it in 1986, she said. The year we lost him. Why? I'd never known about his collection. Never even knew he collected anything. That night changed everything. Not just for me, but for how I saw my whole job. 15 years of looking for scientific explanations, and here was a 4-year-old kid blowing holes in everything I thought I knew about life and death. I started reaching out to other families who'd lost children, started really listening to their stories about strange coincidences, unexpected signs, unexplainable moments. A mom in Phoenix whose daughter's favorite song plays on random devices, even when they're turned off. A dad in Seattle who keeps finding his son's baseball card in places it couldn't possibly be. A family in Boston whose security cameras keep catching glimpses of light in the shape of their daughter's profile. I used to dismiss these stories. Now I write them down. All of them. Because Colton taught me something. Death isn't a wall. It's a door. And sometimes, just sometimes, we get messages through that door. Dr. Martinez changed too. She put a small whiteboard in the surgery recovery room, lets kids draw what they saw while they were under. She's building a collection of drawings now. Some of them look a lot like Colton's. I'm still a scientist, she told me last week. I still believe in medicine and facts and evidence, but I also believe there's more. So much more than we can explain. The funny thing is, this story hasn't made me less of a skeptic. I still question things, still look for proof, still dig for facts. But now I understand. Being skeptical doesn't mean dismissing everything you can't explain. Sometimes it means being open to bigger truths. You might be wondering why I'm sharing this story now. Why, after all these months of research and interviews, I decided to talk about it. Last week, I got a letter from a nurse in Chicago. She'd heard about Colton's story and reached out because something similar happened at her hospital. A 6-year-old girl coming out of surgery started talking about meeting people on the other side. She described meeting a boy named Colton. He told me to tell the man with the penny that there's more stories to share, the girl said. That hit me hard because I'd never published anything about the pennies. Never told anyone except my mom that night on the phone. See, this isn't just about Colton anymore. It's not even about near-death experiences. It's about something bigger. All around us, every day, people are getting messages they can't explain. Little kids are saying things they couldn't possibly know. Families are finding signs that defy logic. And maybe that's how it's supposed to be. Maybe we're not meant to understand everything. Maybe the point isn't to prove it all scientifically. Maybe the point is just to know that the door between here and there isn't as solid as we think. Colton's still out there, by the way. Just a normal kid now, playing video games, riding his bike, going to school. He doesn't talk about his experience much anymore unless someone asks. But sometimes when he thinks no one's watching, I've seen him stop whatever he's doing and look up, just for a second, like he's hearing music nobody else can hear. Last time I visited him, I asked if he had ever doubts what happened. If maybe it was just a dream. He looked at me like I'd asked if the sky was blue. Why would I doubt it? He said. It's like doubting your family exists just because you're not in the same room with them. That's what I want you to take from this story. Not just the details about heaven or the proof of life after death, but that simple truth. Love doesn't stop. Connection doesn't end. The people we lose aren't gone. They're just in another room. And sometimes if we pay attention, they find ways to let us know they're still there. Through pennies, or songs, or random acts we call coincidences. Through the words of children too young to know they're saying something impossible. I keep that crayon drawing on my wall, not because it proves anything. I keep it because it reminds me to stay open, to pay attention, to look for the signs. And yeah, I still find pennies in my car. Still always from 1986. Still always heads up. But I don't throw them away anymore. You know what's funny? When I started looking into Colton's story, I thought I'd end up writing another piece debunking supernatural claims. Instead, I found something that changed not just what I think about death, but how I live. I see those little signs everywhere now, not because they weren't there before, but because I stopped explaining them away, stopped being too grown up to believe in miracles. The other day, I ran into Jenny, that nurse from Colton's surgery. She's pregnant now. When I congratulated her, she smiled and said, "My daughter told me this would happen." "Your daughter?" I asked. "The one I lost, the one Colton told me about. He said she wanted me to know I'd be a mom again when the time was right." That's the thing about truth. It doesn't need you to believe in it. It just keeps showing up again and again until you're ready to see it. Dr. Martinez still runs her surgery department with scientific precision. But now she also keeps a box of crayons in her office. Lets kids draw what they saw when they were sleeping. Her wall's getting pretty full. As for me, I'm still a reporter, still ask questions, still look for proof. But now, I also look for pennies. And I think about what Colton said about everyone up there being able to see us and trying to send us signs, about how most of us are too busy being sad to notice. Maybe that's the real story here. Not just that heaven exists or that death isn't the end, but that right now, in this moment, someone you've lost is trying to tell you they're okay, that they love you, that they're still around. Maybe they're doing it through a song on the radio, or a butterfly that won't leave your window, or a dream that feels too real to be just a dream. Maybe they're trying to tell you it's okay to be happy again, to live fully, to look up once in a while and smile, knowing they can see you. That's what I learned from a 4-year-old boy who died for 3 minutes and came back with a story that changed everything. Sometimes the biggest truths come in the smallest packages. Sometimes all you have to do is pay attention. And sometimes, just sometimes, a penny isn't just a penny. Dear friends, thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot. Have a great day.